There's something about the early morning hours that few women truly understand. And when that reality finally becomes clear, many realize they've spent years living entire days without ever truly choosing how those days would begin. The first 60 to 90 minutes after you wake up form one of the most influential windows in the functioning of the human brain, a period in which the mind is still transitioning between deeper neurological states and the analytical mode that dominates the rest of the day. This means that at this time, your emotions, your thoughts, and even how you perceive yourself are still much more malleable than you might imagine. It's as if every morning your mind opens up a kind of silent space before starting to build the rest of your day, carefully observing the first stimuli that enter that space and using those initial clues to adjust your energy, your mood, your mental clarity, and even the way you position yourself in the world. But there's one detail that is rarely explained honestly. Most people completely waste this mental window. Instead of allowing their brains to calmly awaken and organize their own thoughts, many women begin the day by immediately immersing themselves in external stimuli designed to capture their attention, such as social media, messages, news, or an endless stream of content. That makes their minds react before they've even had time to realize how they're really feeling. This seemingly small pattern creates a much deeper consequence than it appears. When your mind begins the day reacting to the outside world, instead of first establishing an internal state of presence and direction, the brain learns that the rhythm of your day will be defined by external stimuli, not by conscious choices. Over time, this produces a constant feeling of rushing, comparison, distraction, and mental fatigue that many women come to interpret as normal, when in reality, they are simply experiencing days that began unintentionally. The truth is that how your mind wakes up in the morning directly influences how you think, feel, and make decisions in the following hours. Because at that moment, the brain is still calibrating the emotional and cognitive circuits that will guide your attention throughout the day. When you understand this mechanism, something very interesting happens. You realize that you don't need dramatic changes, impossible routines, or rituals that take up half your morning to completely transform how your day begins. Small decisions made during this initial period can gradually reprogram how your mind responds to the world, increasing your emotional clarity, inner stability, and ability to stay focused on what truly matters. In today's video, we'll explore some simple changes that directly affect the brain's natural functioning in the first hours of the day, changes that help your mind awaken with more awareness, presence, and emotional autonomy. But before we continue, if this type of reflection resonates with you and you want to learn more about how to strengthen your mind, your clarity, and your way of positioning yourself in the world, take this moment to subscribe to the channel and like this video. When you do this, YouTube understands that this type of conversation is valuable and starts showing this content to other women who are also seeking to live with more awareness and direction. Now let's start by understanding what the first silent habit is that may be robbing your mind of clarity in the early hours of the morning. The first decision many women make every morning happens almost unconsciously. Yet this small choice has a profound impact on how the brain wakes up and organizes the rest of the day. In the first few seconds after opening your eyes, the most common impulse is to reach for your phone, as if the mind is immediately seeking some kind of stimulus to confirm that the world has already begun to unfold outside. This gesture seems harmless, almost automatic, but there is an important neurological mechanism happening at that exact moment. When you wake up, your brain is still finalizing the transition between slower brainwave states associated with deep rest and the alert state that dominates the rest of the day. And during this short interval, your mind is especially sensitive to any kind of emotional or social information that comes into contact with it. This means that by opening social media, messages, or news right after waking up, you are allowing the first stimulus of your day to be defined by other people, other stories, other expectations, and other urgencies that don't necessarily belong to your life. The brain interprets this flow of information as a signal that it needs to react immediately to the external environment, activating circuits of social comparison, emotional evaluation, and anticipation of problems, even before you've had a chance to realize how you're really feeling. Over time, this pattern creates a silent feeling of mental restlessness that many women carry throughout the day without knowing exactly where it comes from, because the brain has already started the morning in reactive mode, trying to keep up with stimuli that arose before consciousness itself had space to organize itself. However, there is a simple alternative that completely changes this dynamic. Instead of starting your day staring at a screen, try creating a small space of presence before allowing any external information to enter your mind. This doesn't have to be a complicated practice, nor a lengthy ritual. It could be as simple as remaining seated for a few minutes after waking up, observing your breathing, noticing the light entering the room, or simply allowing your thoughts to awaken at their own natural pace. This small interval creates something extremely valuable for the brain. It offers a few minutes in which your mind can awaken from the inside out. Instead of reacting immediately to the external world, when this space exists, the brain begins to organize its own emotional and cognitive priorities before dealing with the demands of the day, which significantly reduces the feeling of mental rush and increases the clarity with which you respond to situations that arise later. There is a silent element that profoundly influences a woman's mood, mental clarity, and even self-confidence throughout the day. And interestingly, this factor begins to act long before any conscious decision is made. The way the body comes into contact with natural light in the early morning hours has a direct impact on brain function, on the hormones that regulate energy and concentration, and even on the emotional stability that accompanies every choice you make throughout the day. When you wake up, your brain is looking for signs from the environment that confirm a new cycle has begun. And one of the most powerful biological signals for this confirmation is the presence of natural light reaching your eyes. Within the retina, there are specialized cells whose function is not related to vision itself, but rather to detecting the intensity of surrounding light. And these cells send a direct signal to the region of the brain responsible for coordinating the circadian rhythm, which functions as an internal clock regulating energy, mood, and sleep. When this signal occurs in the early morning hours, the brain releases a very specific sequence of chemical responses that help the body wake up with greater clarity and stability. One of these responses is the natural increase in morning cortisol, which is often interpreted only as a hormone linked to stress, but which in reality, when released at the right time, acts as a powerful activator of energy, focus, and mental alertness. This healthy cortisol spike helps the brain organize priorities, improves attention, and creates an internal sense of capability that many women describe as simply feeling more present and better prepared to handle whatever the day demands. At the same time, exposure to light in the morning initiates a biological process that directly influences sleep quality many hours later, because the brain begins counting down the time until the release of melatonin that will occur at night. In other words, morning light not only helps you wake up better, it also prepares your body for better sleep later, creating a much more stable energy cycle throughout the day. What makes this especially interesting is that this change doesn't require anything complex. Something as simple as walking for a few minutes outdoors, opening the window while having coffee, or allowing natural light to reach your eyes as you start your morning is enough to activate this system. Over time, many women realize that this small habit begins to produce a surprising cumulative effect. The mind becomes clearer, energy stable, and that constant feeling of starting the day already a little late or mentally tired gradually begins to disappear. And when the morning ceases to be a time of mental disorientation and becomes a time of internal alignment, the rest of the day begins to organize itself in a much more natural way. There is a very brief moment during the morning when the body can be activated extremely efficiently. And the curious thing is that this stimulus doesn't require long hours of training or an exhausting physical routine to generate real effects on brain function. For many years, the idea prevailed that only long exercise sessions could produce significant benefits for the body and mind. But recent research shows that short bursts of movement right after waking up can trigger important neurological changes that influence the rest of the day. When you move your body first thing in the morning, even for just a few minutes, a series of neurotransmitters begin to be released almost immediately, including dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine, substances directly related to motivation, mood, and the ability to concentrate. This chemical combination creates something that many women describe as a feeling of inner alignment, where the mind ceases to be scattered or slow and begins to operate with more clarity and intention. There is also an interesting phenomenon that occurs when movement happens right after waking up. The brain begins to associate the start of the day with action and vitality. And this association is repeatedly reinforced until the body practically anticipates this moment of activation. Over time, what once seemed to require discipline begins to happen almost automatically because the brain learns that this small initial effort generates an immediate emotional reward. Furthermore, moving your body in the early morning hours increases blood flow to brain regions responsible for planning, decision-making, and self-control. These are precisely the areas that determine how you react to the day's challenges, how you organize your priorities, and even how you deal with unexpected frustrations or pressures. Another important point is that this movement doesn't need to follow any rigid model. It could be a short sequence of bodyweight exercises, a few minutes of mindful stretching, a brisk walk, or even a brief mobility routine to stimulate the joints and muscles. What really matters is not the extreme intensity, but rather the message you send to your own brain in the first hours of the morning. This message is simple and powerful at the same time. She communicates to her nervous system that the day has begun with presence, movement, and intention. When this type of beginning is repeated over several days, something begins to change very quietly within the mind. A woman who starts her morning on the go rarely carries over into the rest of the day that feeling of constantly trying to regain energy or trying to reach a pace that always seems a little out of reach. Instead, she enters the day with a base of energy already built. And this base transforms into a kind of stability that influences how she works, thinks, decides, and positions herself in relation to her own choices. When a woman begins to pay close attention to what happens inside her own mind in the early hours of the day, she notices something that has often gone unnoticed for years. Even before speaking to anyone, before opening social media or replying to messages, her mind has already begun silently constructing a narrative about who she is and what she believes she deserves that day. This process is fast, automatic, and profoundly powerful because the way you think in the first few minutes of the morning isn't limited to that specific moment. It permeates the rest of the day like an invisible lens through which you interpret every situation, every opportunity, and every decision. A woman who wakes up mentally repeating doubts, insecurities, or comparisons begins the day placing herself in a smaller place than she actually occupies in the world, and without realizing it, starts acting in a more restrained, hesitant, and tolerant way towards situations that do not reflect her true worth. The problem is that when this pattern repeats itself daily, it stops seeming like a passing thought and starts to transform into an identity. The human mind believes what it hears repeatedly, especially when these messages appear during moments of emotional vulnerability, such as the first moments after waking up. When the brain is still between rest and full consciousness, that's why so many intelligent, talented, and sensitive women end up living lives smaller than they could live. Not because they lack ability, but because their mornings continue to silently reinforce a limited version of who they are. Reprogramming the mind at this specific moment isn't about repeating empty phrases in front of the mirror. or trying to force an artificial positivity that disappears hours later. Reprogramming your mind in the morning means consciously choosing which narrative you will allow to guide your thoughts before the world has a chance to influence who you believe yourself to be that day. And when a woman changes that internal dialogue first thing in the morning, something subtle begins to transform within her. Because by changing the way she thinks about herself even before the day begins, she also changes the way she positions herself in relation to her own life. When a woman consciously begins to change the way she conducts the first moments of her day, she discovers something that many people go their whole lives without clearly realizing. The life a person chooses to live rarely stems solely from the grand decisions made during dramatic or transformative moments, but rather from the small mental directions they silently choose to repeat every day. For a long time, many women believed that they needed to wait for external circumstances to finally feel more confident, more secure, or more prepared to occupy a larger space in the world. But the most liberating truth woman can discover is that building this new version of herself begins long before any visible changes happen on the outside. It begins the moment she decides to no longer allow automatic and outdated thoughts to define who she believes herself to be. When a woman takes responsibility for how she nourishes her own mind first thing in the morning, she stops starting her day reacting to the world and starts consciously defining who she chooses to be. This change may seem small at first, almost imperceptible within an apparently ordinary routine. But over time, it transforms into something profoundly powerful, because a mind that learns to position itself clearly in the early hours of the day begins to develop a kind of inner stability that no longer depends on external approval, constant comparisons, or the insecurities that once seemed inevitable. And when this stability begins to solidify within a woman, her way of thinking, deciding, and acting naturally becomes firmer, more conscious, and much more aligned with the kind of life she truly wants to build. This means that, little by little, she begins to recognize more clearly what strengthens her life and what simply no longer belongs to the version of herself that she is creating. Ultimately, reprogramming your mind before 8 in the morning is not just a productivity technique or a passing motivational habit. It is a silent and powerful choice to begin each day by reminding yourself that your identity no longer needs to be defined by old patterns, but can be deliberately built from the decisions you make from now on. If this reflection resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel, because it signals to YouTube that this type of content is important and helps this message reach more women who are also seeking to grow with greater awareness, clarity, and self-respect. And I'd also like to hear from you in the comments. What thought do you notice popping into your mind most often in the early morning hours? And what kind of mindset do you believe you need to start cultivating now to build the life you truly want to live?